So now we're coming to the macro side of things. And like I said in the first introductory lecture in this class, there's really two levels of economics. There's the micro, which is individual people and individual firms making decisions in their everyday lives. 22 million Australians doing whatever they do for whatever damn reason they feel like it. That's the micro side. And then there's a macro side, which I liken to a satellite point of view of Australia. That the macro side is looking at large things like the inflation rate. Right? That's not the change in one price. That's a change in thousands of prices of goods all across the system. Looks at things like unemployment. That's not one person's decision whether or not to look for a job. That's the result of several 100,000 people making decisions about what to do this week, whether to look for a job. So the micro and macro levels are very different. They have very different approaches in economics. And unfortunately, there's very little connection between the two of them. So this class used to be taught as a microeconomics, which was ECO 110, and then a macroeconomics, ECO 120. So we've gone to shoving both of them together. And what you'll see is really that there's not much connection between the two. They're very different creatures, microeconomics and macroeconomics. So just be careful. The intuition won't always be the same. So why do people study macroeconomics? Well, macroeconomics is often easier to motivate people with because it's the big things. It's things like, why is inflation so high? Or why is inflation so low? What is the Reserve Bank doing, and what does that have to do with inflation? Why did unemployment go up? What the heck happened in the global financial crisis? Why are lots of people out of jobs? Why is the economy of, say, the European countries teetering? What's going on with the European Union and the ECU? What's happening with Greek banks? So all those things are really macroeconomic questions. And so often they're the things that you'll see on the front pages of newspapers. Microeconomics tends not to make it as often to the front pages of newspapers because microeconomics is normally about individual people or individual industries. So all these sorts of questions are the typical sorts of questions that you'd like to be able to answer in a macroeconomic class. We won't have the tools actually to talk about all of these, but this is what you typically would like to be able to talk about in macro. Okay, so let's go and have a look. This is a really nice website. So this is a website put up by I think it was a Swedish statistician. It's showing 200 years worth of economic growth. So what we're measuring here is the income per person in different countries and the life expectancy of people in different countries. So we're starting off here in 1800. So the life expectancy in 1800 was about 30 for humans. Now, you guys live in a country with a life expectancy close to 80. So it's a very different universe. Most people died really young. Actually, what's going on here mostly was childhood deaths. I forget what the percentage was, but close to half the population didn't make it past the age of 5. Lots of people died in childbirth. Lots of women died in childbirth. Lots of children died. And so they dragged the average down in a sense. Once you got past 40, you could expect to live relatively, well, maybe to 60. But as you can see, the average was about 30 across all these countries. Now, each of these dots represents a country. So if you look at a dot here, say this one out here is United Kingdom. So this says that in the UK in 1800, the average person at birth could expect to live to the ripe old age of 40. So I'd already be dead, on average. Most likely I wouldn't have made it past 5. Okay, and per capita income, so this is adjusted to today, so it's about $2,700. So maybe about the average buying power of, say, someone in China nowadays. Right, so that was 1800 in England. That was the most advanced country on the planet. Now, the size of these dots tells you something about the size of the populations here. So China was still the biggest country on the planet back then, as you see it still is. And India was pretty big. Again, India, life expectancy of 25. So some of you guys would already be dead, and you'd have a good 3 years, 4 years, 5 years to look forward to. Better party on, because you're not going to make it, right? Right? Only the good die young. Well, in this case, everyone died young. So what do? Well, I love this. So you press play. And it tells you then the history of 200 years worth of GDP growth and the outcomes. First thing I'd like you to notice is that actually what tends to happen is for the first 100 years, there's almost no change in life expectancy. Watch. So here we are, we're going through time. Countries' life expectancies pop up and down. Sometimes that's wars. So actually around World War II, a lot of countries' life expectancies dropped because, of course, people were getting slaughtered en masse. In other cases, it's just a little bit of data. No one's really quite sure. So have a look. So up until we get to about 1900, life expectancy in most places is still only around 40. So 100 years worth there, life expectancies didn't go up. And look, India, 24. So India's life expectancy over 100 years has declined by 1 year on average. Remember, like I said, this isn't everyone dies at 25. This is an awful lot of people die at 2. And some people make it to 8. And then what do we see? Well, we see this century. So in this century, what you start to see is, first, the more advanced countries exploding. Again, what will this country be? That's going to be the US. It's a relatively large. It's the most advanced country, in a sense, in GDP terms and life expectancy terms. And where are we? We're about here. Oops, New Zealand and Australia. So we expect to live a little bit longer than the Kiwis. If you have a look actually back around the turn of the century, we were even, or about 1900, Australia was one of the top 5 countries on the planet in terms of life expectancy and per capita income. Why was that? Why was Australian life so good around 1900? Well, we were a relatively resource-rich country. We had lots of sheep. We had lots of gold. We tended to dig all that stuff up and sell it overseas. So we tended to be relatively wealthy then. Didn't have much manufacturing, anything like that, but we tended to be very resource extractive, which, in a sense, we still are with all of our iron and coal mines. So in a sense, though, it's been relative decline for Australia since then, where we're starting to lag behind the Americans. And as you can see now, so China and India are starting to increase their life expectancy. Again, that's modern medicine. And so you get up to about 2000, you can see there's a vast increase in China's, just track where that big red ball go. A vast increase in China's wealth per person over time. And also a very large increase in life expectancy. So look, from about 1900 to 2000, life expectancy in all these countries went from about average of about 40 to an average of about 8. Again, an awful lot of that isn't necessarily people, well, some of it is people living longer, but actually an awful lot of that is children not dying. An awful lot of the increase in the last 100 years around the planet has been basically making sure that children survive childbirth. So actually childbirth is the most dangerous thing you'll do in your entire life if you're a female. And it's actually very dangerous for the children too. You shouldn't worry about jumping out of airplanes or paragliding or anything. None of those things are remotely as dangerous as giving birth. So this is a great little website because it's got lots of little interactive graphics, particularly of macroeconomic variables like this one. And I think it's a wonderful thing just to see what's going on. It gives, I think, everyone a lot more perspective. Who's still lagging behind here? So the colors are actually the continent. Blue is Africa, which is the poorest and least long-lived continent on the planet nowadays. And of course, it's the poor African countries. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on in this class. Okay, so that's a great little website called Gapminder. Basically, this guy's taken on himself to try to create world statistics that are interesting, but also easy to read. So it's well worth just having a look through.